Welcome all. This week we are in the second week of our DNS capacity development trainings. My name is Seher Sauroğlu. I am working with ICANN Global Stakeholder Engagement Department, and we are closely working with our stakeholders in Middle East and Africa region from our Istanbul office. I am based in Istanbul. Today we will talk about DNS abuse. Last week, if you had a chance to join our meeting, my colleague Paul Mushan gave much detailed information about DNS, the basics of DNS. And today we will get into how DNS is being used for threats and for abusive purposes. And Yazid, my colleague, will also explain a couple of strategies that help to mitigate all these DNS attacks. As you see on the slide, we will also particularly talk about how to secure our DNS infrastructure. Let me go to second slide. As we're looking at today's agenda, my colleague Yazid Akanyo will give an example case study, DNS espionage and sea turtle attacks, and he will also provide explanation on DNS abuse and the threat landscape. This agenda also will cover DNS abuse during COVID-19 epidemic, DNS security extensions, and our abuse activity reporting system. I meant ICANN DNS abuse activity reporting system. With that, I would like to welcome my colleague Yazid Akanyo. Yazid is a technical engagement specialist and working with ICANN Office of Technology. He's basically responsible for developing DNS trainings and support the community in Africa and Middle East region. He reports to Adiel Aklogan, who is the Vice President of Technical Engagement Department at ICANN. With that, Yazid, thank you for being with us today, and I would like to leave the floor to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Seher. Hi, everyone. Hi, Paul. Sorry to be a bit late. Let me just open my camera for a few seconds. My internet is, I think, a bit bad, so greetings. I will switch off the video now to make sure that the connectivity is quite stable through all the session. I hope you can hear me very well.
Yes, loud and clear, Paul. And I will be helping you with the questions. If I see any questions in the chat pod, I will be read. And this is also a kind reminder to all participants. Please interrupt us anytime if you want and raise your questions in the chat pod. We will be happy to clarify and address your questions during and throughout the presentation.
Yes, because we love a lot of questions, and we do love interactive sessions. So feel free to ask your question as soon as you have them. I have understood that there is also a live stream on, is it YouTube?
That's right.
Okay. So there may probably be some questions over there as well.
Yeah, I will be monitoring the chat pod in the YouTube channel as well.
Okay, cool. I know you are the best on that, Seher, so I trust you.
Thank you.
And for those who are also attending, Paul used to share a lot of additional informations and resources, usually on the chat. I don't know how those who are attending the session from YouTube will also receive those additional content. Seher, will you maybe?
Yes, I will keep sharing the links in the YouTube channel at the same time with Paul. All
right. Okay, so let's start the engine and move forward. Thank you. So like Seher already said, this is today's agenda. Let's start with those two major incidents that happened, let's say 2 to 3 years back now. It was 2018 and 2019. Next slide, Seher. Okay, thank you. So DNS espionage and sea turtle. And those are actually two major incidents that if some people maybe were still in doubt that DNS is very sensitive and DNS has become also a channel for those bad guys to disrupt services. So what's happened actually is that there was a major cyber attack which affected all up to 40 organizations, spread in more than 10 countries, mainly in North Africa and the Middle East. But also some countries in Europe were also affected. And the targets were mainly national security organizations. Yes, it could be quite strange that security organizations are affected, but this is how it works actually. Some ministries of foreign affairs also, so we are talking about collecting some sensitive information, some very confidential intergovernmental informations. Some energy companies also have been disturbed. So it was a kind of serious attack. And we'll see in the next slides how this kind of attack have been prepared and conducted. But here we can quickly see those countries which have been affected in terms of victims of Citotal attack. Cisco did a lot of investigation, a lot of research and investigation to understand where this attack came from, what are the victims or who are the victims, where are they located, etc. So Cisco really engage a lot of investigation on that. And you can even see that some victims were actually even based in United States and in Europe, like we were saying just before. Next slide. So if we look at the methodology that has been conducted, we can see that the bad guys, the bad actors actually, they prepared a lot and they used a kind of combined, okay, they combined a lot of techniques to actually execute or achieve what they wanted to do. So they performed sort of several 10 minutes attacks just to avoid detection by firewalls and all those intrusion mechanisms that could exist in different networks. And they targeted some top-level domains like .se and .ch for Switzerland. They compromised EPP credentials, so they tried to get the credential. When we talk about EPP, EPP is actually a protocol that is used usually between the category of entity that we call registrars and the registries. So who are the registrars and who are the registries? The registries are actually .sh or .se, for instance. So those are the top level domains. Who manage the top level domain is called the registry. So top level domain, we can take example of .com, .org that the participants should probably know very well. And because we are also talking about Turkish students, so .tr is actually your top level domain in Turkey. So the entity that manages the top level domain is called the registry. Okay, so now to sell the domains under the top level domain, we use to refer to registrars. So the registrars are kind of business companies that build contracts with the registries in order to sell the domains. Okay, They sell the domains to who? If you buy a domain name, you become what we call a registrant. Okay, a registrant it can be a company, or it can even be an individual person who buy a domain name. So the hierarchy, we could say, is registrant, those who buy the domain name. They buy from where? They buy from who? From registrars. Okay, and registrars build the contract with the registries. Okay, this is what we also call triple R model. Okay, RRR, registrant, registrar, registry. So coming back to the presentation, the EPP credentials are actually the EPP itself is the protocol that is used between the registrar infrastructure and the registry infrastructure to push the domain that has been bought by the registrant, those details like personal information, the domain name itself, etc., etc. So EPP is used to push those information to the registry. So the bad guys actually tried and got those EPP credentials and connected to the registry infrastructure on behalf of the registrars. Doing that, they were of course able to modify several information in the registry database. And they rewrote, for instance, the authoritative name servers for some domains. Of course, they also did a lot of manipulations. They got some email credentials. They finally also got email calendars and so. They also tried to generate certificates from Let's Encrypt and Komodo. So this is the method they use, or the combined methodologies that they use to perform the attack. Next slide, please. So now let's try to see or to understand what do we really call DNS abuse, because, for instance, what we have seen in DNS espionage or CTOTL is a kind of DNS abuse. But let us go back to the, we say, to the beginning to understand how the DNS itself actually works. So DNS is what we call domain name system. It's an infrastructure distributed around the world. And it is actually composed of, I will say, three major parts, okay? One part is what we call the authoritative name servers. If you look at the right side of the presentation, you can see root server.com authoritative server and whatsapp.com authoritative name server. So those servers at your right side are those who reply. They usually reply to questions. They provide answers to questions because they have an internal database in which there are what we call the resource records. So they have the resource records for the domain that they manage. For instance, the .com authoritative name server will hold all resource records related to .com. Seher, could you just point the mouse to .com authoritative name server at the right of the presentation? The second one, just below. Yes, exactly. So wherever you are from around the world, despite the network from which you are connected to internet, if you want to go to any .com website, what usually happens is that your network on which you are connected has a kind of DNS server that we call the recursive name server. This recursive name server is the one in the middle, in the center of the slide. So the recursive resolver is supposed to be in every network, okay? But there are also some public recursive resolvers that whatever is the network you are physically connected to, you can also use that public recursive resolver. The most used, the well-known are 8.8.8.8, quad 8, or quad 9, 9.9.9.9, or quad 1 also, 1.1.1.1. The 8.8.8.8 is from Google, okay? So you can be connected to a network in Benin or in Turkey or in Kenya, okay? And you can use the quad 8 because Google guys have configured the quad 8 recursive resolver to be open. So it can receive requests from any network and fetch the answer from the authoritative name server like the .com that we have mentioned about. So usually what happens is that the recursive resolver will, in the normal case scenario, will always try starting the queries by the root server, because the root server is the top of the DNS hierarchy. Okay, and the root could answer either by giving automatically the answer or giving what we call a referral. So the root server can give a referral to .com authoritative name server, for instance, or it could even give a referral to .org or .tr directly, because all those .com, .org, .tr, .bj in Benin, where I'm based in, or .ke in Kenya, where Paul is based in, all those top-level domains are defined in the root server database. Okay, so the root server is the one who can give the referral to those top-level domains authoritative name server, and then the recursive name server will just ask a new question to this authoritative name server it has been referred to. Of course, it can continue its journey by getting another referral. In this case, .com give a referral to whatsapp.com authoritative name server. Okay, until finally the recursive resolver got the answer for www.whatsapp.com. And this is the third part of the system, which is actually the first one, if I should go from the beginning, because the first part, being the third one in my explanation, is the user itself. So you can be on your laptop, you can be on your mobile phone, whatever is the device from which you are connected to, but you just want to connect to a system. You want to maybe visit a web page or use a web service on the internet, etc. So you open your browser and you type in the URL of the service. But of course, your device needs to know the IP address, because internet use is based in IP addresses and names. So the DNS is actually the infrastructure that will collect or get the name that you have typed in and try to retrieve the IP address that corresponds to that name before allowing you to open maybe an HTTP session to that destination. Next slide, please. So we have seen over the years that unfortunately, when a technology comes in, there are bad actors who also try to find, I would say, another kind of use for the same system, and it has been the case for DNS. So other years we have seen what we now call abuse of the system or misuse of the system. Abuse refers to any activity that directly attacks the DNS infrastructure itself, while misuse will refer to trying to leverage the DNS protocol itself or the domain name registration processes, the one I explained you a bit before between registrant, registries, and registrars in the middle. So all activities that could leverage the DNS protocol or the DNS, the domain name registration process for malicious purposes, like people going to register for a domain name and then starting using this domain name to distribute malwares, for instance. Okay. Next slide, please. So cybercrime, hacking, malicious conduct, or data corruption, denial of service, or privacy violation could be kind of, I would say, consequences, okay, of running a DNS abuse or misuse. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's try to categorize, because there are different types of abuse, and we could categorize them, even if till now there is still some discussion on going to clearly identify the borders of abuse. It is quite difficult, and discussion has been going for several years now. But the community, the ICANN community agreed that we can classify in 5 categories abuse. First one being phishing. So all domain names that support web pages that masquerade trust entities, okay, like government agencies, banks, okay, or a well-known brand in your country, or any online merchant, for instance. So what happens is people can register for a domain name to I will say redirect the users to a fake web page. Okay, the user wants to go to his bank, but he never knows that someone somewhere is trying to redirect him to a wrong web page. Of course, the user will see the web page looking like exactly his authentic bank website, while he is not on the right website. And the bad guy is just expecting the user to share his credentials, okay, so that he could now use them to connect to the right website and maybe manipulate his bank account, for instance, and even buy some things on behalf of the right user. We have also seen kind of domain names which have been registered to distribute malwares, for instance, or domain names that have been registered to control botnet, command and control. Some domains also are registered sometimes to distribute spams, okay? We should not confuse here between spam itself and domain names registered to distribute spams. Those are two separate things. So the spams themselves are not abuse of the domain name system, but any domain name that has been registered to distribute or to relay spams is a kind of abuse. And there is a last category that is called farming. It is a kind of redirection of unknown user to fraudulent sites or services. So usually how this is done, it can be done by recursive resolver cache poisoning or DNS hijacking, for instance. Next slide, please. So why is the DNS a target for attacks? That could be a very interesting question. But of course, DNS provides translation for domain names into IP addresses, like we said before. So you can imagine that any disruption of the DNS service itself, what does it mean? It means a disruption of all those online services that we mentioned about, the merchant, the government services, the banks services, and we could even think about all those e-learning platforms or social medias, etc., etc. So if the DNS doesn't work, we used to say that the internet doesn't work. That's the summary of the thing. So people have understood that to disrupt a service, we could just go and disrupt the DNS. Of course, exploiting the DNS also allows the attacker to trick the users, unfortunately. And there are several vectors for exploitation. We told about malicious registration of domain names. We told about hijacking name resolution, so cache poisoning, for instance, or corrupting the DNS data directly in the DNS database on the authoritative name server side. Next slide, please. So when we look at the same architecture, but in a different way or from a different perspective, we can see that all those red cross, red X are potential point or potential target point of the DNS economy. And you can understand that there are several vulnerabilities or yes, weaknesses from the DNS. Of course, when the DNS was designed in 1983, security was not the main target. The main objective was to make it work. Okay, security issues have started raising several years after. Next slide, please, Sergio. So usually those malicious guys we told about, the objectives are different and there are many. They could be interested in distributing malwares or activists like website defacement, for instance. We have seen a lot of governments website defacement those last years, or promoting even counterfeit goods. And during COVID-19 also, we have seen a big rise of such kind of activities where websites have been created to sell some drugs at the earlier age of COVID-19, the vaccines even, while officially there was no vaccine that has been adopted officially. So those are kind of activities or reasons for the malicious guys to register or to compromise domain names. Next slide, please, sir. So when the attackers operate, let us try to see the steps, okay, from the day they start planning till the attack itself and what usually happens after. So there is a pre-attack phase, okay, where those guys try to prepare whatever they need in terms of register the domain names, etc., etc. And then, of course, they plan and they perform the attack, okay. And when they perform the attack, of course, there are some users or some consumers that are affected, okay, definitely. Among those ones who are affected, not all of them will complain, okay. They will complain. Even not all of them will notice that they have been affected by an attack, and this is the worst case scenario. But unfortunately, there is a large part of those victims who even ignore that they are victim of an attack. But those who are, we say, well aware of such kind of attacks will probably inform authorities about being victim of the attacks, to usually who law enforcement, how do we call those entities? CERTs, okay? It could be the national CERT or regional CERT, okay? That could be informed, or even in some countries, the police. Usually police now have, like in my country, we have within the national police, we have a dedicated team who manage all those abuse on the internet and in the digital space, globally speaking. And when those law enforcement guys are informed about the cases, of course, they try to perform a lot of investigations, analysis to try to understand what happened. They open a court order to, sometimes they need some court orders to perform or to continue the investigations in some jurisdiction, for instance. They could also request some support from the private sector to get, maybe law enforcement guys could even request the ISP support to give more details, for instance, about the source of the attacks, etc., etc. And of course, at the end, those law enforcement guys try to get lesson learned from the attacks and ways to improve or to avoid such kind of things in the future. Next slide, please. So it's quite difficult to admit it, but this will never stop. Why? Because attackers are always motivated to find new vulnerabilities. There are people who are really engaged in some kind of day-to-day vulnerability detection on systems, on infrastructures. Attackers can also be creative, sometimes even using very sophisticated techniques. They are almost always ahead, very far ahead of the good guys. And even while we are talking now, something is probably being prepared somewhere in the world. Next slide, please. And as if we're not having too much headache, unfortunately, Internet of Things, that some people even treat as Internet of Vulnerable Things, is not of any support, because it is complicating the things. Why? Because we have so many devices, IoT devices that are connected to the internet. And unfortunately, security is not really, or was not really the first objective of those IoT devices. But now, since maybe 4 years, we have seen some improvements from IoT devices manufacturers starting thinking about including security in the devices. Next slide, please. So yes, we have heard about some DNS or DDoS amplification attacks. Maybe 2018, we discovered Mirai attack, where plenty of IoT devices have been used to conduct DDoS attacks around the world. So it is one of the evidences that IoT has become a serious matter in terms of security for the DNS. Next slide. So COVID-19, more than 1 year now, 1 year and a half almost. Let's see what has been DNS abuse, maybe trends, okay, during this COVID-19 period. But why are we interested in abuses in COVID-19? Of course, like any other kind of important events in the world, we used to notice also a kind of increase in domain name registration. And of course, COVID-19 has not been different from this global notice. Mainly also because we have faced these lockdowns in many countries, work from home also for a lot of companies. So we have seen an increase in terms of domain name registration. Next slide. So in ICANN, Office of the CTO, where we work, actually, we also try to conduct a research to try to identify the abused domains related to COVID-19. The methodology has been quite simple, at least in the words. So we search for zone files. We search for some keywords related to COVID-19 pandemic in the zone files. So those zone files are GTLD and some CCTLD zone files. Okay, GTLDs again, it is .com, .org, .africa, .home, .hotel, .academy, etc. While CCTLDs are those 2 characters top-level domains like .tr, .bj, .ke. We were talking about a few minutes back. So because there is a contract between ICANN and all those GTLDs, the GTLDs are now a bit more than 1.2K, 1,200 domain names at the generic top-level domain names. While country code top-level domains, because they do not have direct contract with ICANN, we just have several, some of them, few of them, who usually share the zone files with ICANN for analysis and for investigation. So we merge all those zone files together, and we try to look for the keywords I was referring to before. And we have seen that among 250,000 domain names that were identified, finally speaking, after all investigation, we have seen just a bit above more than 2.5 thousand that have or that present high confidence of abuse activities. Next slide. And if we look at the keywords that have been used to identify the problematic domain names, 4 of them actually, I would say, composed 60% of the affected domain names. So those 4 keywords are COVID, mask, corona, and virus. So those 4 keywords are themselves constitutes 60% of the affected domain names. Of course, there are other keywords that you can see in the camembert at your right, top right of the slides. Those other keywords are like vaccine, lockdown, pandemic, quarantine, etc., etc. Okay. Next slide, sir. And of course, not all the cases are always true. So there can be some false positive as well. And we needed to go deeper in the investigations, okay? So we used some external tools like API calls, VirusTotal, AlienVault, FishTank, or Google Safe Browsing, etc. Okay, we even had to also go and look for the DNS records, the network locations, and plenty of other additional details depending on the cases, okay, to actually confirm what are the proven cases, okay. And at the end of the day, we usually report kind of a dozen of domain names on daily basis. So those dozen of domain names were usually shared with registrars and registries to take further action on the site, because ICANN cannot take any action. So we just share with the concerned registries and registrars, and they will continue the investigation and take action from the site. Next slide, please. So let us now try to see what are the countermeasures or the solutions, okay, to fight against DNS abuse, or at least to reduce DNS abuses. The first one is what we call DNSSEC. It's a protocol, domain name system security extensions. Okay, so it's actually a protocol deployed to secure the DNS, okay, by adding some security based on public key cryptography, okay, in the DNS hierarchy. Of course, DNSSEC has been the result of more than a decade of community-based and open standard development. Next slide, please. DNSSEC, based on this public key cryptography and digital signatures, will provide two things, actually: data origin, authentication, and data integrity. Why data origin, authentication, and data integrity? If you recall the DNS architecture, where we saw the authoritative name servers at the right side of the slide, and the recursive resolvers in the middle, and the user itself at the left side. So how the recursive resolver could confirm that the answer actually came from maybe whatsapp.com and not any other website, any other authoritative name server, okay? So data origin authentication, which is implemented in DNSSEC, is the way for the recursive resolver to actually confirm that the person or the server who actually provided the answer is the right authoritative name server, and not maybe someone who is doing IP spoofing or any other man-in-the-middle attack to respond on behalf of the whatsapp.com authoritative name server. The second function of DNSSEC is data integrity. So the recursive resolver itself is sitting in a network in a country, but the authoritative name server that actually provided the answer itself is sitting in another network, probably in another country. So the answer definitely has moved from one source to one destination. How the recursive resolver makes sure that this answer has not been modified during the transportation This is data integrity functionality that would help the recursive resolver to actually confirm that nobody has modified the answer from the authoritative name server to the recursive resolver itself. So DNSSEC will offer protection against DNS data spoofing, okay, but it will not protect against kind of DDoS attack or such kind of attacks that could affect the DNS infrastructure, the system itself. Next slide, please, sir. Okay. So how does DNSSEC actually work? You, again, as the user, you want to go to maybe www.majorbank.com. Without DNSSEC, okay, the recursive resolver of your network will just ask this question, who has a kind of ARP, okay, for DNS, who has www.majorbank.com, and someone will reply, okay, an authoritative name server will reply. But the DNS recursive resolver has no way to actually confirm that the IP address it received is the right one. So it will just forward the IP address to the user. And the device of the user will now open the HTTP session. But with DNSSEC, there is an intermediate step where the recursive resolver, once it receives the IP address, before forwarding it to the user, will make an additional step that we call the DNSSEC validation, where it will actually confirm those two functions that we have seen 2 slides before: data origin authentication and data integrity. And once those two functions are actually confirmed, the recursive resolver will say that, okay, the data is authenticated. I can now forward it to the user for safety browsing. But if the data is not well validated, it will not forward the IP address to the user. Next slide, please. So in terms of deployment at CCTLD level, again, CCTLD is the top level domains for the country codes. So all countries around the world, almost all, have their own CCTLD. And those are kinds of statistics per region for DNSSEC deployment. It means those CCTLDs that have signed the zone. Next slide, please. I already mentioned it. DNSSEC validation is the process where or during which the recursive resolver will actually validate the data. And to validate the data, the resolver will need the signatures of those data. So coming back to the real life, okay, when you write an admission letter, because we are with students today, so your university requires an admission letter, okay, in your application. How does the university actually confirms that you are the one who wrote the admission letter? Looking at your signature at the end of the letter, for instance, okay? So this signature is supposed to be unique. You are the only one who could generate this kind of signature. It's almost the same concept here, okay? So the authoritative name servers will apply some signatures on the data using those cryptography public algorithm that we mentioned and hashing protocols. Okay, so once the signatures are generated from the authoritative name server side, the recursive resolver will just get the clear data and the signatures. then use those signatures to actually validate the clear data it has received. We have also seen maybe these last 2 years some application directly doing DNSSEC validation. Otherwise, most of the validation are done in the recursive resolvers. But the bad news, unfortunately, only around 25% of DNS responses are validated, okay? And we still need to do a lot of work to actually configure DNSSEC validation in the recursive resolvers of all those networks that allow users to go to the internet. So there is still a lot of work to do, and the efforts should be combined. Not only ICANN, but you guys also, you can check with your ISP if they are doing DNSSEC validation. And I have seen Paul also sharing some links where you can go and see if the network where you are connected to, which you are connected to, is actually doing DNSSEC validation or not. Okay, next slide, please. Another kind of solution to fight against abuse is what we call DAAR, Domain Abuse Activity Reporting System. It's a project at ICANN. Next slide, please. So DAAR actually is a system for reporting on domain names, registration, and abuse data across TLDs, top-level domain registries and registrars. So it will actually use those TLD zone files again, like we did for DNS abuse during COVID-19. So the same zone files of the TLDs will be used to actually do a lot of studies and use some external data to classify the domains which are presenting activity, abuse activities. And DAR allows to classify the abuse domains in 4 categories, whether it is phishing abuse, botnet abuse, malware, or spam abuse. Okay. Another interesting functionality of DAR is that it is very transparent. So you can go to ICANN website. There is some pages dedicated to DAR. You will see all the methodology, all the infrastructure of DAR, and how DAR reports are actually produced. And the system itself is reproducible. So we have seen some certs even interested in building the same infrastructure for the CCTLD or for the country itself. So if you follow this link, icann.org/octo/SSR/DAR, you will see all the information related to DAR, and there have been monthly reports since 2018 that DAR actually exists. Next slide. So the system itself, again, will use the zone files of the top-level domains, some registrar data also, and some domain reputation data. Those ones are external to ICANN, collected from outside, to classify in phishing, malware, botnet, and spam categories. Next slide. So the goals of DRA were quite a lot, providing a kind of report on threat activity at top-level domain or registrar level, study histories of security threats on domain registration activity, helping operators also to understand or to consider how they should manage their reputations. Because if you have or if you see a lot of abuse activities in top-level domain, it could maybe discourage you to register in this top level domain, for instance. So from the management of the top level domain perspective, it is very important to look at those trends. And of course, studying also malicious registration behavior in the global DNS, it's also one of the objectives. And of course, assist any operational security communities. Next slide, please. So these are samples of DAR reports. You can follow the URL that Paul has already shared in the chat to look at the latest report, the latest DAR report and the latest trends. Of course, the data are anonymized, so there is no kind of information related to each top-level domain. No, those reports publicly shared are globally merged data. So it is not, it is a combined data for all the top-level domains. Next slide, please. Other initiatives at ICANN, very quickly, we won't go into the details. There is another initiative that we call ITHI, Identifier Technology Health Indicators. So it is a kind of supportive for DAR, and it actually follow the health of some internet identifiers. So if you follow this link, ithi.research.icann.org, you will see there are up to eight indicators that are actually monitored on ITHI. And that is one of them. The roots, the behavior at the root server system are also one of them. And you can also see some partnerships between ICANN and some ISPs to get the data passing through the recursive resolver, but being anonymized and doing some analysis as well. There is another initiative, DNS TICR, which is still being, I would say, built. I won't talk much about that, but it is an initiative to facilitate the collaboration and sharing information between the actors of the community. Technical engagement and support in DNSSEC deployment. So we are here, Paul and myself, and we have been since 1 year now doing a lot of webinars, a lot of trainings, a lot of hands-on to help mainly CCTLDs to sign the registry. But we have also done courses in terms of DNS operations and show people how they should manage some security concerns in their day-to-day activities. At the ICANN community side, there is what we call DSFI, DNS facilitation, DNS security facilitation initiative, which is also a technical study group to discuss about and coordinate actions related to fighting against DNS abuse. Of course, there have been also a kind of framework of what is DNS abuse conducted by some registries and registrars in ICANN community. Next slide, please. So if you want to write to Octo, maybe to request for hands-on training on DNSSEC or any other training that you would like ICANN to give you, please send us an email octo@icann.org, or you can directly get in touch with Seher as well, who is in charge of the region, and she is always happy to prepare such kind of trainings. Next slide, Seher. So those are some reference documents that you are welcome to visit. Please feel free, if you are interested in getting more information related to abuse, feel free to go to those URLs. I think Paul will probably share them if he is not yet doing so on the chat. Thank you so much. That's pretty much it. So far, no questions received, but I'm sure that some are pending. So I will give back the floor to Seher for any probable questions. Seher, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yazid. This is very well summarized DNS abuse presentation. I know that this topic is way broader than this slide deck, but thank you very much for making it solid and clear for us.
Thanks,
I was checking the chatbot and YouTube channel as well. So far, we didn't receive any question, but let me pause here for a minute and see whether we have any questions coming.
Okay, well.
Angel Maya, apologies if I mispronounce your name, but he wanted to thank you. I just want to deliver this message to you, Paul.
Thank
he
you.
wrote, yeah,
Thank
he
you.
wrote in the YouTube channel. We hope that this presentation would be helpful for the audience, but if you guys have any further questions and if you want to reach out to us, you can always find us at social media channels. You can directly write to me, or you can contact ICANN with the email shared by Yazid, octo@icann.org. If that's correct, let me show you the email address again, octo@icann.org. If you have any specific technical questions, if you need any further trainings on DNS security and DNS abuse topics, that would be great if you directly reach to us and we can just figure out how we continue. And I am looking at the chatbot right now. And this video will be available on IEEE Computer Society channel, and it can be reached anytime by the audience. Yes, we also shared the links on the YouTube channel as well. You can refer to those links. With that, I am still waiting to see whether we have any question. But so far, it seems like we're good. Is it?
Okay.
Again, I would like to thank you that you
Thanks,
just
Seher.
made this presentation with this community. And we'll be here. You can always reach out to us. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Seher. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.